Video number 9, Registration Steps for your participants. As we have stated before, your participants will receive information that has been sent by default on GoToWebinar's system. You will need to restructure this information to adapt it to your webinar subject, as well as to other factors like the number of attendees and technical setup. You can also prepare support material for your participants, like documents, audio or video files, which they will be able to use before or during the session to help them better understand the subject. Registration settings. In the Registration Settings Preview section, you'll see the registrant limit, which is currently set at 250 and no notifications to show. Go into the Edit options and see the registration steps that our participants will have to follow, as well as the GoToWebinar's settings. In webinar size, you have to indicate the number of registrants you are going to allow for this webinar. Because this is a free trial, the attendee limit is 100 people, but you can set a maximum of 250 registrants if you need or want to. Let's leave this at 250. Remember, if you have a greater number of assistants, the webinar will have a wider reception and larger word-of-mouth distribution. Paid users will have a larger number of participants here, so make sure to consider this when organizing your webinars. Approval. Here we have the options to automatically approve or manually approve your registrants. By default, this is set to automatically approve your registrants, because this way, registrants will instantly receive information on how to join the webinar. If you decide to manually approve registrants, they won't receive this information until after you have approved their registration, which, depending on your schedule, can take longer than if it were automatically approved. This could make would-be attendees change their minds if they get sidetracked by other activities before you send them the information. Also, if you don't properly organize yourself, you may receive lots of registration requests and omit some of them. That's why we recommend you leave this as automatically approve, so you can focus on preparing and advertising your webinar, and use the manual approve only in very specific cases. Upon registration. You want to verify that a participant has received their information, so check the Send an Email to My Web address. That way, when someone signs up for your webinar, you'll receive a confirmation in your email. By default, when someone signs up for your webinar, they will be redirected to GoToWebinar's confirmation page, which is the welcome page that each registrant will see when they enter their information. You also have the option to redirect them to a confirmation page that you might have customized. Change your option to direct registrants to your own confirmation page and enter the URL for your confirmation page below. Recording. Here you will specify if new attendees will be able to get a recording of this webinar when it ends. This means that if someone registers during the broadcast or after the session is over, they can have a recording of the webinar or part of the webinar that they have missed. By default, this is unchecked, but it can be useful to have your registrants able to get a recorded copy of the session. When you check it, a Select a Recording button will appear, and from here you can search for your recording and upload it. Password. You can set up a password for your webinar, which means your participants will have to enter it when going into the session. This is unchecked by default, but if you decide to use a password, you will have to enter it in the text box below after checking Create a Webinar Password. Note that you will have to send the password to your registrants, or otherwise they won't be able to get in. Also, you will need to send the password to yourself because GoToWebinar won't do it for security reasons. You can do it in your personalized invitations or emails. You can now review the information you just provided and save, but first you can check the Questions tab on the right. Questions. In the Questions tab, you can set the information fields that your participants may need to check when signing up for your webinar. By default, GoToWebinar only asks for first name, last name, and email address. This information will always be required and cannot be changed. Here you are presented with a list of fields that you can add to your registration questionnaire. The information asked for ranges from address, city, zip code, and country to organization and number of employees. You can check them individually if you wish to add any of these fields to your registration process. You can also set them as required information in the required checkbox on the side if you'd like. If you check the field or the required checkboxes, all the fields will be checked. We recommend you only use the required by default questions. It is well known that the more you ask, the less registrants will be willing to respond and may give up on registration altogether. We recommend you add questions that you may find useful for studying your audience, but we also recommend you add them as optional questions. You can add new questions by clicking the New Question button. Enter your question in the text box and choose if you want it to be a short answer question or a multiple choice question. When choosing multiple choice, you will be required to enter the possible answers. Hit Create and you'll see our question. You can edit it by clicking over it and pressing Update, or remove it by pressing the X on the right. After reviewing all of the information we just set up, we hit Save and Continue. We are again taken back to the Manage Webinar main page for our current webinar. In the following video, we are going to edit the last of the information needed to run our webinar.